The first thing you learn building a house is that wood remembers. It remembers every winter that swelled it and every summer that dried it to a creek. I was sanding the edge of a stair tread Lydia and I had installed 40 years ago, the air thick with the clean bite of pine, when the landline rang on the kitchen wall behind me. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss a story like this one. The handset still has paint on it from the last time we redid the trim. I wiped my hands on a rag, left pale dust on the receiver, and answered, "Rowan Residence." A voice I knew too well came back through a car's speaker echo. "Daniel." "No, call the title office this afternoon," he was saying to someone. "If we line up the paperwork now, we can get him into Maple Ridge by spring. The market's hot. We shouldn't miss it." There was a pause, the thud of turn signal clicks, and then my daughter's voice slipped in. Soft, measured, trying too hard to sound reasonable. "Not get him into, Daniel. We'll help him move. He gets confused with bills. He told me he lost his passwords again." I didn't say a word. I just leaned my shoulder against the wall and listened to my own life being gritted into someone else's plan. "Emma," he said, quieter now, "your dad's a good man, but the liability is real. If we start the transfer before the taxes reset, we save, what, 10, 15 grand? We'll keep him in the loop. He doesn't need the stress." I almost laughed at the word liability. The caller ID had flashed Emma, Dad's house, when it rang. Years ago, when we were on the same phone plan, she set up a contact so her calls would route through my landline when her cell was on low battery up here in our little coastal town. Maine weather eats signals. I suppose the setting never got turned off. I suppose some things you forget, and some things you remember at exactly the wrong time. "Okay," Emma said, voice tight. "I'll talk to Ms. Mills at the bank about the power of attorney renewal. She liked Mom. It'll look natural." "That's my girl," Daniel said, satisfied. "And tell the agent to keep it quiet, discreet. We don't want a for sale sign in front of the old place. Too emotional." The line clicked once like someone adjusted the volume. Then the car noise faded, and all I heard was the house, the fridge humming, a clock in the hall that ticks louder when the air's cold, and the breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I set the handset back into its cradle the way a man sets down a tool he's suddenly afraid of misusing. On the counter, a red scarf lay folded beside Lydia's picture. She wore it the winter we dried the framing with kerosene heaters and wrapped our coffee mugs with old socks so the handles wouldn't burn our hands. I touched the edge of the wool the way you touch an old bruise to see if it still answers back. In the window over the sink, I could see my reflection and the stretch of our acre lot behind me. Maples, bare and silver, the swing we rigged from a boat rope for Emma when she was 8, the bay window Lydia begged for because every kitchen needs a face. The face looked older now, houses age. So do the men who keep them standing. I washed my hands to get the dust off, though it had worked so deep into the lines of my knuckles that the water turned the sink opal. I dried them on the towel Lydia embroidered with our initials, F+L, a simple joinery you can still see from across the room. "Liability," I said aloud to the empty kitchen, testing the weight of the word, the way a carpenter tests a beam. Low battery, power of attorney, discreet. The language of caretaking wearing the shoes of control. I stepped out onto the porch. The December sun was a thin white coin above the tree line. Marjorie Lane, my neighbor, was tapping ice from her stoop with the handle of a broom too short for the job. She saw me, lifted the broom as if it were a flag, and called, "Morning, Frank. Watch your steps. Sneaky as a salesman today." I smiled and waved, not trusting my voice yet. I watched my breath drift and vanish like something I'd said too late to matter. Inside, I made coffee. Black. Lydia always took hers with honey. The jar is still there in the pantry, sugared solid, a small amber monument to the way sweetness settles when you stop stirring it. I carried the mug to the kitchen table and set it near the folder I keep tucked under the phone. The folder is nothing fancy, just a manila sleeve with rubber band scars from being opened and closed too many times. Deed, taxes paid, insurance, repairs, a few receipts from lumber yards that don't exist anymore, and a card, creased and yellow, with a name I keep around the way you keep a spare length of rope. Caleb Hart, attorney at law, former carpenter. His handshake used to say more than most men's business cards. I didn't open the folder, not yet. If you've ever measured and cut, you learn it's a sin to rush. First you mark, then you remark, then you cut once and live with it. I walked the rooms instead, the way you walk a fence line after a storm to see what held. The hallway still smelled faintly of varnish. The bath door still sticks in humid weather, though today it moved clean, cold air shrinking the jambs tight to straight. In the living room, the piano Lydia loved sat with its lid closed, the dust a soft uniform across the top except for two ovals, where my hands rest when I think. I pressed one key. The note was a penny dropped in a well, small and true and swallowed. Back in the kitchen, the phone lit up again. A text preview blinked across the caller ID display. Emma, love you, Dad. Can we do Sunday dinner? It landed on the table like confetti after a courtroom verdict. I poured another mug and watched the steam drift toward the bay window. Out front, the maple stump by the drive still wears the D-shaped scar where my chainsaw bounced when the blade hit a nail we'd driven there 30 years earlier to hang a tire swing. Wood remembers. So do I. At noon, I walked down to the shed to fetch the old aluminum ladder. I didn't need it for anything. It just felt good to stand under the eaves and run my hand along the fascia, to feel where paint has lifted in tiny curls that mean spring project. Beneath me, the snow carried my boot treads like signatures I didn't remember practicing. Maple Ridge, I said to the sky, trying the words the way a man tries a coat he never planned to wear. My friend George moved into Maple Ridge last year. Wide hallways for walkers, nice staff, a bowl of hard candy by the front desk that tastes like nothing. He told me the place smells like lemons and endings. I set the ladder back in the shed and pulled the door shut until the latch bit. In the dim light, a nail apron hung from a hook, Lydia's handwriting on a strip of blue painter's tape stuck to the pocket. Don't wear your pride in here. I used to make a show of pretending not to see it, then tuck it back when she wasn't looking. Marriages are full of that, ordinary dances learned by heart. The landline rang once more. Habit took me to it. Rowan residence. Mr. Rowan? Sandra Mills here, from Bay and Coastal Community Bank, a voice said, professional with a hint of condescension she probably didn't know she carried. Hope you're staying warm. I'm calling to confirm a routine renewal on a limited power of attorney your daughter has on file for utilities and tax remittances. No action needed. We just like to keep our ducks lined up. I looked at the red scarf. I looked at the F+L. Ducks, I said. Always good to know who's arranging the pond. She gave a light laugh, the kind you use when you don't want to repeat yourself. You'll see a letter in the mail. There's also a signature page. Pure formality. We can courier, if you prefer. I prefer to pick it up, I said. I like knowing who's on the other end of my pen. A beat. Then, of course. We're open till 4. We said our goodbyes. I hung up and stood still until the house stopped ringing in my bones. On the porch, the air smelled like snow about to change its mind. I put on my coat, grabbed the truck keys, and tucked the manila folder under my arm. Before I stepped out, I took one last look at the kitchen, the bay window, the 2 cups on the counter, the picture of Lydia taken on a day when we were too young to know that the price of building is learning when to let go. I wrote a note on the back of an old grocery list and stuck it under a magnet on the fridge. If you forget who you are, check the hinges. Doors that matter should still swing true. In town, the bank sits next to the hardware store that still stocks nails by the pound. In paper sacks that go soft if you leave them on a damp bench. The bell on the bank door is the same as it was when Lydia and I opened our first account, a chime that sounds like someone politely clearing their throat. "Mr. Rowan?" Ms. Mills said when I gave my name. She was younger than Emma, hair scraped neat, eyes that flick to the screen before they find your face. "We just need you to initial a couple places so we can renew the existing authorization, purely for convenience." I read the page. Once. Twice. There it was, buried in language that wears friendliness like a winter coat. Transfer of limited interest for tax efficiency. A notch cut in the wrong side of a beam. Small, precise, catastrophic, if you don't see it. "I'll take these," I said, folding the papers gently. "I measure twice before I cut." Her smile clipped at the edges. "Company policy is—" "I'm company today," I said, and left her with the kind of silence a person can either learn from or resent. Back in the truck, I didn't start the engine right away. Lydia's scarf was around my neck, tucked in, warm with a smell I've never been able to wash out. Cedar and a little salt, and something that might just be the past when it's behaving itself. I laid the papers on the passenger seat, set Caleb Hart's card on top, and rested my hand there like a man blessing bread he knows he's going to break. The ocean was only a mile down the road, its winter skin pewter and stubborn. Somewhere out on the bay, gulls were carving the same air I was breathing. All right, I thought. If you want to move a wall without collapsing the roof, you brace it first. I turned the key. The truck shuddered, coughed, settled. When I pulled onto the highway, the light had that flat, late afternoon color that makes every landmark look like it's thinking hard. I had a call to make, a house to walk once more from the inside out, and a daughter to love without letting go of myself. It's a funny thing about houses. People think they keep the weather out. Sometimes they keep the truth in, until you open the right door and let the air change everything. By the time I drove back from the bank, the light had thinned to the color of steel. The truck's heater breathed warm dust that smelled faintly of old coffee and pine shavings. On the passenger seat, the bank papers rested beneath Caleb Hart's business card, like a pair of weights keeping each other honest. The road home runs along a frozen inlet. Ice crusts the reeds there in tiny glass blades that catch the last of the sun. I pulled over halfway, left the engine idling, and watched the tide lock and release against the rocks. The sound reminded me of a hammer striking wood, that soft after ring you only hear when you're working alone. When Lydia and I first built the house, she said the view of the inlet was worth every bruise. We didn't have a crew back then, just a borrowed cement mixer, 2 stubborn backs, and faith. 43 winters later, the frame still stands square, proof that sometimes stubbornness outlasts love. I drove the rest of the way without music. The silence was cleaner. At the house, frost feathered the inside of the windows. I left my coat on the hook, turned on the small desk lamp in the study, and spread the bank papers across the drafting table, where the blueprints used to live. Lydia's handwriting still loops across the plywood surface in faded pencil. "Kitchen window. Don't forget the light." I traced the line of her old note with one finger, then flattened the pages Sandra Mills had given me. Lawyers call it limited interest. Bankers call it tax convenience. But to a builder, it's a crack that starts in the foundation and runs until it finds daylight. Once it does, the whole structure shifts. The papers went back into the folder. I needed perspective, not panic. Old habits help. When I can't solve something, I rebuild it in wood. I fetched the roll of blueprints from the closet, yellowed edges, taped corners, unrolled them across the table. There it was, the outline of our home drawn in pencil and coffee stains. The porch Lydia insisted must be deep enough for a rocking chair and a fight. I smiled despite myself. She always knew the right dimensions for life. Each line on the page carried its own echo. I could see her standing on the gravel driveway, hands on hips, hair tied in a bandana. "You overbuild everything, Frank," she used to tease. "You don't need beams that thick." And I'd answer, Maybe not, but I like knowing the roof won't argue when the wind shows up. Tonight the wind was out again, knocking a loose shutter against the siding. The rhythm almost matched her laugh. I poured 2 fingers of rye into a glass I hadn't used since the funeral. The first sip burned steady, the kind that makes a man remember the difference between pain and clarity. Somewhere between them I decided what to do next. Caleb Hart. He'd left carpentry 15 years ago after a fall from a scaffold shattered his knee. Went to law school on settlement money. When he sent me his first business card, I told him he was proof that some frames get rebuilt. He said, "I still work with structure, just different materials." I took his card from the folder and dialed the number. It rang twice. Caleb Hart. "Still answering your own phone?" I said. A pause, then the laugh I remembered, gravel and warmth. "Frank Rowan. Thought you retired from sanding life's edges." "Edges got sharp again," I said. "I need to talk contracts." "That doesn't sound like you." "It will once you hear why." He listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was only the hum of his office line. "Frank," he said finally, "you've got the documents?" "Right here." "Good. Don't sign. Don't shred. Bring them by tomorrow." "Morning. We'll read the grain together." "I'd appreciate it." "You always were the cautious kind," he said. "Measure twice? Cut once?" I finished. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet for a while. Outside, the moon rose like a dull nail-head above the trees. I could hear Marjorie's television through the thin winter air, some game show laughter floating across the fence. Ordinary life still going on, the way it always does while one man's floor starts to tilt. I walked the hallway again, fingertips brushing the plaster. Every dent had a date. The year Emma crashed her tricycle, the winter we moved the stove and Lydia swung the mallet too wide. Memory is a carpenter's curse. We remember every crooked nail. In Emma's old bedroom, sunlight had bleached the wallpaper into ghosts of flowers. On the shelf sat a toy plane missing one wing. I'd promised to fix it. She'd promised to stop flying it inside. Neither of us kept our word. I picked it up now, balanced it on my palm, and wondered when promises start turning into paperwork. Back in the living room, I lit the fire. The wood popped, then settled into a steady flame. Heat crawled back into the walls, like forgiveness testing the hinges. I opened my notebook, the one where I keep measurements, phone numbers, thoughts that don't fit anywhere else, and wrote, "If they see me as old timber, let them forget. Old wood carries the grain of storms that younger trees haven't met." The pen scratched across the paper, sure and slow. My hands shook only after I stopped writing. When the clock in the hall struck 10, I cleaned the glass, turned off the lamp, and stood by the bay window. The snow had stopped. Across the yard, Marjorie's kitchen light glowed amber. She'd probably baked something again. Tomorrow, when I head to town to see Caleb, I'll bring her the extra jar of honey Lydia hoarded. Small gestures keep a neighborhood from becoming just a map. The house creaked once as I climbed the stairs. Not a complaint, just acknowledgement. I paused at the landing, touched the frame of our bedroom door, and whispered into the dark, "Don't worry, Lydia. I'll build this right." The echo came back the way it always did, soft, patient, and exactly the size of the room we made together. Emma's text had said, 6 o'clock, Dad, casual. When someone uses that word casual about family, it's never casual. By 5:30, I was already on the road, the heater blowing weak warmth against a windshield filmed with salt. I had washed my hands twice before leaving, out of habit more than vanity. A builder's hands don't come clean anymore. They just grow familiar with what won't wash off. Lydia used to joke that the grain of a house ends up living under your skin. Tonight, that felt truer than ever. Emma and Daniel's neighborhood sat on the edge of Portland. New builds with perfect fences, cars that still smelled like factory, plastic, identical porches pretending to be different. Their house was the same model as 3 others on the block, only hers had a wreath shaped like a dollar sign. Maybe I imagined that. Daniel opened the door before I knocked. "Frank, there you are." He said it like I was late. though I wasn't. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Too much calculation behind them, like a man rehearsing his friendliness. He wore a crisp shirt, sleeves rolled, no apron, the kind of host who supervises rather than cooks. "Traffic light," I said. "Snow melting makes everyone nervous." He stepped aside. "Come in, come in." The house smelled of lemon polish and ambition. Not a trace of food yet, only the faint ozone scent of an oven just turned on. Emma appeared from the hallway, a glass of wine in her hand, her expression bright and careful. "Dad, you made it." "Wouldn't miss it," I said. She hugged me, briefly, politely, and I felt the tremor in her shoulders, the nervous energy of someone performing normalcy. Lydia used to say, a forced smile has more muscles than a real one. "Sit down, Dad," she said quickly. "Dinner's almost ready." The table was already set, white plates, silver napkin rings, a centerpiece of eucalyptus branches that smelled like a spa. I sat at the end, not the head. Daniel poured wine into my glass without asking if I wanted it. "To family," he said, lifting his glass, "and new beginnings." I raised mine out of politeness, though my eyes stayed on him. New beginnings always mean endings for someone else. The first few minutes passed in safe conversation. Weather, the neighbor's new roof, a mutual acquaintance from church, the kind of talk that fills the room so no one has to listen. I let them lead it. You learn a lot from what people choose not to say. When the main course finally appeared, roasted chicken that smelled store-bought, Emma set the platter down with a smile too steady. "So, Dad," she began, "how's the house holding up? I worry about you alone out there. Pipes, wiring, all that." "Still standing," I said. "I built it to outlive me." Daniel cut in smoothly. "Of course you did. Solid craftsmanship. But you know, upkeep costs can get tricky. Emma was saying maybe we could look into some consolidation options." "Consolidation?" I repeated, turning the word over like a piece of warped timber. "Sounds like a banker's dinner," he laughed. "You know me, Frank, always thinking ahead." "I do know you," I said quietly. The fork in my hand clinked once against the plate. Emma touched Daniel's wrist, the signal couples share when they're trying to steer conversation back to safety. "We just want you comfortable, Dad. There's a place near the coast. Maple Ridge. You'd love it. Big windows, friendly people." "I've heard," I said. "Smells like lemons and endings." She blinked, unsure if I was joking. "You've been there?" "I visited a friend last year. Didn't stay long. Couldn't find the workshop." Daniel smiled too quickly. "They have craft rooms." "Craft rooms," I repeated. "Nice? Does the sawdust smell the same?" Silence. Fork slowed. Even the clock in the kitchen seemed to hesitate. I leaned back. "You know, Emma, when your mother and I built our house, we never used nails we couldn't remove. She said permanence should come from people, not metal. I didn't understand it then. I do now." Emma looked down at her plate. Her lips moved slightly, counting seconds, maybe breaths. "Dad, we're not trying to take anything from you." "I know," I said. "You're trying to protect me." Like that call with Ms. Mills at the bank. Very protective. Daniel's head snapped up. "What?" I smiled politely. "She mentioned the renewal today. Papers look tidy, almost convincing." The color drained from his face, then returned in a rush of red. "Frank, that was supposed to... that's routine." "I read the routine," I said. "It's impressive, really. I haven't seen joinery that sneaky since we hid the liquor shelf behind the piano." Emma's voice broke. "Dad, please don't do this." "Do what? Eat dinner? That's all I came for." Daniel pushed back his chair. "If you're accusing..." "I'm observing," I interrupted. "Same thing carpenters do before they start removing beams. You look for the crack that thinks it's invisible." He stared at me, chest heaving slightly. Then he laughed. Brittle, defensive. "You've got it wrong. We wanted to make sure you're safe." I nodded slowly. Safety. Always the first word before control. Emma stood, her napkin trembling in her hand. "Dad, I didn't want it like this. I was just..." You forget bills sometimes. The power of attorney was supposed to help. I know, I said softly. You learned that tone from your mother. Gentle before firm. Her eyes filled. Mom, I said, would have kept a promise instead of a clause. The words landed heavier than I meant them to. She sat back down, shoulders caving slightly. Daniel muttered, "We'll talk another time." "No," I said. "You won't need to. I've already talked to Caleb." He blinked. "Caleb? Old friend. Knows how to read contracts better than I do. We're making a few changes." Emma looked at me as if I'd spoken another language. "You're selling the house?" "I'm securing it," I said, "for your mother's name." The air went still, dense with unsaid things. Finally, Emma whispered, "You're punishing us." I shook my head. "Punishments for people you stop loving. I'm building a lesson instead." We finished dinner in silence. The chicken cooled, untouched. I noticed the reflection of the overhead, light trembling in her wineglass, the way small things shake before they spill. Lydia's scarf felt warm at my throat. When I stood to leave, Emma reached out. "Dad, please, don't shut me out." I looked at her hand on my sleeve. "You already built the door, Emma. I'm just learning to use it." Outside, the snow had started again, dry flakes whispering across the car roof. In the window's reflection, I saw them standing side by side. Daniel stiff, Emma uncertain. I started the truck, headlights cutting through the curtain of white. For a moment, I imagined Lydia sitting beside me, whispering what she always said after an argument. "Leave the anger in the room. Bring the lesson home." So I did. Morning came with a sky the color of old tin. The storm had left a thin crust of snow that glittered without warmth. From the upstairs window, I could see Marjorie Lane already outside, bundled in a coat that might have been older than my house. She was banging her shovel against the railing to break off ice, muttering to herself in a rhythm that somehow kept time with the creaks in her porch. She noticed me through the glass, raised her shovel like a salute, and shouted, "Don't just stand there, Frank Rowan. The snow won't clear itself." I opened the window just enough to let her voice in. "Marjorie," I said, "you ever think maybe the snow's doing fine right where it is?" She cackled. "You always did talk like a man negotiating with weather." By the time I made it down, she'd already cleared a path halfway to my mailbox. Her cheeks were red, her scarf crooked, and her eyes, still sharp enough to catch what most folks miss. She leaned on the shovel when I approached. "You look like someone who slept with his boots on," she said. "Didn't," I replied. "Didn't really sleep either." "Ah," she said knowingly. "The family dinner kind of insomnia." I smiled despite myself. "Word travels fast." "Not word," she said, nodding toward the empty driveway across the street. "Cars coming back late. Lights going on in all the wrong rooms. I've lived here long enough to know what regret looks like through curtains." I didn't answer. She jabbed the shovel into the snow and crossed her arms. "Well, out with it. You gonna tell me, or do I have to read it in the obituaries?" I told her. "Not everything. Not the bank details or the clause. Just the shape of it. How I'd heard the call, how dinner had turned into a quiet war fought with polite smiles and hidden knives." Marjorie listened without interrupting, the way only widows learn to. When I finished, she wiped her nose with a handkerchief and said, "You know what I like about you, Frank? You never raise your voice. Makes the other side strain to hear their own guilt." "I'm not looking for guilt," I said. "Just balance." She grinned. "Balance is overrated. Justice lasts longer." I looked toward my house. Lydia used to say that fairness isn't about winning. It's about being able to sleep. "And can you?" she asked. "Not yet." She shifted her weight, considering me. "You'll do something, won't you? Not the shouting kind of something. The quiet hammer and measure kind." "Probably," I admitted. She nodded, satisfied. "Good. Because if you let them take the house, Frank Rowan, I'll haunt you myself." That made me laugh. Really laugh, the first time in days. I thought ghosts were supposed to mind their own property lines. "Not me," she said. I trespass for sport. The snow began to fall again, small flakes that looked like the ash from a long-ago fire. I took her shovel and finished the path while she supervised, offering unsolicited commentary about my technique. When we reached the mailbox, she tapped the metal with her mittened hand. "You still get paper bills?" she asked. "Some," I said. "I like things that don't vanish when the Wi-Fi sneezes," she chuckled. "You and your analog morals." Inside the box sat a single envelope, damp at the edges. Bay and Coastal Community Bank printed in blue ink across the corner. I slid it into my coat pocket without opening it. Marjorie noticed. "That from them?" "Yeah." "You gonna open it?" "In a minute." She gave me a long, knowing look. If you wait too long to read bad news, it starts believing it's good news. I turned the envelope over in my hands, the paper soft from cold. Maybe I'm giving it time to thaw. "Just don't let it refreeze," she said, then pointed her shovel at me. "And Frank, when you do whatever you're planning, make sure it's clean. No gossip, no mess. Folks love a scandal till they realize it's their reflection." "Sound advice," I said. "That's why you keep me around." By the time I went back inside, the coffee had gone cold. I reheated it, opened the envelope, and read the expected words. Renewal notice, sign here, tax efficiency. Same careful trap, same polite poison. I set it beside the phone and dialed Caleb. He answered on the second ring. "Morning, Frank. Got your message. I'm looking at the renewal. Don't sign it. I wasn't planning to." "Good man. Bring it with you tomorrow. I've already pulled the original deed from county records. There's a clause they overlooked." "What kind of clause?" "The kind that keeps you holding the hammer," he said. "We'll go over it line by line." "Appreciate it," I said. "That's what friends are for. You just focus on staying polite. Polite scares them more." When I hung up, I sat there a while, listening to the house breathe. Wood expanding in the heat, pipes knocking like a heartbeat in the walls. Lydia used to say a house tells you what it needs if you're quiet enough. Right now, mine was asking for patience. At noon, I saw Marjorie again through the window, walking back from town with 2 grocery bags and her hat pulled low. She stopped at my gate, set one bag down, and waved me over. Inside was a small cherry pie wrapped in wax paper. "For when the world feels too serious," she said. "Also, if you need a witness for whatever you're cooking up, I'm free Tuesdays." "You volunteering for trouble?" I asked. "Always," she said and winked. "Keeps me young." When she left, I stood in the yard, pie in hand, snow catching in the folds of my coat. The fence between our houses had 3 missing slats. Lydia used to call it the conversation gap. She said a good fence keeps secrets, but lets advice through. Marjorie and I have been talking through that gap for 20 years. I went back inside, set the pie on the counter, and finally smiled. Not because everything was fixed, but because the plan was finally starting to sound like something I could build. Caleb's office sat above a hardware store that still smelled like linseed oil and brass fittings. The sign on the door downstairs read, "Hart and Givens, attorneys at law," but everyone in town knew only Caleb ever showed up before 9. Givens was a name on a letterhead. Caleb was the kind of man who preferred the smell of paper to perfume. When I walked in, the bell above the door gave a single tired ring. He was already standing behind his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, tie loose like a man caught between blueprints and verdicts. "Frank," he said, voice warm and gravelly, "you look the same, like someone measuring a beam no one else can see." "I've been checking the level," I said, holding up the manila folder. "And it's off." He gestured to the chair. "Let's have a look." The office hadn't changed much since the last time I'd been there. The old drafting table in the corner, a shelf stacked with law books, and a few carpenter's tools that had followed him from his first trade. On the wall hung a framed photo, the 2 of us 30 years younger, standing in front of a half-built house, sawdust in our hair, Lydia holding a thermos between us like a peace offering. He saw me looking. "She kept us fed that winter," he said softly. "She kept everyone fed," I replied. He nodded once, then opened the folder and spread the documents across his desk. Let's start with the renewal notice. I handed him the envelope from the bank. He put on his glasses, adjusted the lamp, and began reading line by line, murmuring occasionally. The scratch of his pen on legal paper was the same rhythm we once used marking studs for Joyce. Measure, mark, confirm. After a while, he tapped the page. Here it is. Clause 4B. Transfer of limited interest for tax purposes. Looks harmless, but it gives your daughter, joint decision rights. She can't sell the house without your signature, but she can initiate a review of ownership if she claims incapacity on your part. Incapacity, I said, tasting the word. That's what they're building on. He nodded. Happens more than you think. People trust family more than fine print. Not this time. Caleb leaned back in his chair, studying me. So what are you hoping to do? Stop them? Undo it? Neither, I said. I want to finish what they started, on my own terms. He raised an eyebrow, meaning, I want to sell it myself, I said, quietly, cleanly, no drama. The deed's still in my name. We transfer it before they realize what's missing from their plan. He smiled slowly. You always were a man who preferred a good finish over a fight. I'm too old for noise, I said. Then we'll need discretion, he said, flipping through a stack of forms. You'll sign a private sale authorization, but we'll route it through a proxy buyer. Keeps your name off any public listing. Who do you trust with signatures? No one, I said. That's why I'm here. He chuckled. Fair enough. Then I'll hold escrow myself. You'll get the funds transferred into a trust account. Under Lydia's name, I said. He looked up. For her? For what she stood for, I said. She wanted the house to mean something more than shelter. Maybe it still can. Caleb set down his pen. You've already thought this through. I've had nights, I said. He nodded, satisfied. All right. We'll need a buyer. Someone who won't spook easily. I might know a foundation looking for property on the coast. They restore heritage homes for community use. That would suit her, I said quietly. She always wanted laughter in those rooms. He gave me a look, half lawyer, half friend. You sure you're ready for what happens next? I was ready the moment I heard my name on that call. We sat in silence a while. The only sound was the hum of the radiator and the faint groan of floorboards under us. Wood remembering old weight. Finally, Caleb spoke again. I'll draw up the papers. You'll need to sign before week's end. I'll handle the rest. Appreciate it, I said. He leaned forward, hands clasped. Frank, I know this isn't just about property. No, I said. It's about honesty. They built their lives on what I built with my hands. Now they need to learn what happens when you forget the cost of the foundation. He smiled. You always did talk like a blueprint. Before I left, he handed me a folder of drafts. Don't read them tonight. Sleep first. Tomorrow, come back and we'll finish cutting. On my way out, I stopped by the window. The street below shimmered with meltwater. A young couple was unloading wood from a truck, laughing as they argued about where to stack it. For a moment, I saw Lydia and myself. Younger, broke, stupidly in love, fighting over nothing. Then the vision dissolved into reflection. Caleb walked me to the door. Frank, he said, you ever miss the noise of construction? All the time. Then think of this as your last project. You're just using a different set of nails. Outside, the cold bit through my coat, but it felt clean, like the air right after cutting through old wood and finding the core still golden. I started the truck and sat with the engine running, the folder on the passenger seat. Across the street, the hardware store owner flipped his sign to closed, lights going dark one by one. Lydia's scarf lay across the dashboard, its red fading to rust in the dim light. I reached over, folded it once, and said aloud, Measure twice, Lydia. We're almost there. The pen Caleb gave me was heavier than it looked. Brass, worn smooth where fingers had held it steady through decades of signatures. He said he bought it after leaving carpentry. that it reminded him every deal still left splinters somewhere. We sat across from each other in his office again. Same morning light slanting through the blinds. Dust motes moving like slow sparks. The air smelled of coffee and typewriter oil. He'd laid out the documents in 3 neat piles, each tagged with yellow slips of paper. Authorization, transfer, escrow. "Read the headers only," he said. "We've been through the bones of it already." I took my time anyway. Builders do that. Double-check the nails before sealing the frame. Each clause was just another joint. Firm, measured, meant to bear weight. When I reached the last page, I paused. "Feels strange," I said. "Selling something I still wake up inside." Caleb nodded. "It's not the walls you're letting go of, Frank, just the paperwork around them." I signed. The brass pen scratched quietly. A small sound, but it carried. My name looked unfamiliar, in ink that dark. He gathered the sheets and slipped them into a folder, sealing it with practiced care. "That's it. The trust will process within a week. Once it's finalized, they can't touch it, not even with a court order." "Good," I said. "I've built things to last. Might as well build a legacy the same way." He leaned back, exhaled. "You did the right thing." "I didn't do it for right or wrong," I said. "I did it for peace." Outside, the sound of passing traffic mixed with the faint clink of hammers from a construction site nearby. Funny how life keeps building, even when yours is being unbuilt piece by piece. Caleb poured us both coffee from his dented thermos. "You know," he said, "most men your age who come here either fight until they lose everything, or they give up before they start. You did neither." "I built slow," I said. "That's the trick," he smiled. "Measure twice." "Cut once," I finished. We drank in silence a while. He watched me carefully, probably wondering how I looked so calm. The truth is, when you've built a house from the ground up, you learn patience. Walls don't rise in one day, and neither does revenge. Before I left, he handed me a small envelope. "Copy of the trust paperwork. Keep it off the main desk at home." "Why?" "Because guilt has a way of cleaning drawers," he said. "You'd be surprised what people start looking for once they feel left out." By evening, the snow had started melting into slush, turning the road to a silver river of runoff. I parked near the workshop and let the truck idle while I sat there, listening to the steady hum of the engine. The smell of oil, pine, and old steel felt like company. I thought of Lydia, how she'd sit on that same bench, sanding window frames, humming low and tuneless, saying things like, "Wood remembers who it belongs to, even when people forget." Inside, I made coffee and opened the envelope Caleb had given me, reading the first line of the trust. "This property, located at 218 Willow Bend Lane, shall be held in permanent trust under the name of Lydia, Rowan Community Foundation." Her name, right there in black and white. It looked strange and beautiful, like she'd been called back to the table after all these years. The phone rang just as I set the papers down. Emma's name lit up the screen. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but a carpenter never leaves an unfinished edge. "Hey, Dad," she said when I answered too casually. "I was just thinking about you. How's everything?" "Everything's sturdy," I said. "Good, good." She hesitated. "Listen, Daniel's been doing some research on estate planning. He says you might want to hold off on making any changes to the house paperwork until we all sit down together." I smiled into the quiet. "That's considerate." "Yeah, we just want to make sure you're protected." "I already am," I said. "Had a good talk with Caleb." Silence stretched thin on the line. Then her tone shifted, lighter but sharper underneath. "Caleb, you mean the lawyer? Dad, you didn't sign anything, did you?" I let the question hang. "I sign things all the time. Bills, checks, Christmas cards." "Dad," her voice cracked barely, "please don't do something rash." "Rash?" I repeated softly. "You mean like filing ownership papers behind my back?" We didn't." She stopped. "You're misunderstanding." "I understand perfectly," I said. "You were protecting your future. I'm protecting your mother's past. Seems fair." Dad, you're making this harder than it needs to be. No, Emma, I said gently. You already did that part. I could hear her breathing, uneven, trying to hold composure. I didn't want it like this. I believe you, I said. But the thing about intentions, they don't rebuild the house after the fire, she whispered. Are you selling it? Something like that, I said, but not to who you think. Then I hung up, not out of anger, just completion, like sanding the final edge smooth before setting down the tools. That night, I lit a small fire in the workshop stove. The metal ticked as it heated, a sound like patient applause. On the wall above the workbench, Lydia's old blueprint still hung under a layer of dust. Porch dimensions, roof angle, her handwriting marking, window facing west. I ran my thumb across it and whispered, We signed it, Lydia, but this time it's ours again. The wind outside picked up, rattling the door once, then settling into the quiet that only follows decisions made right. The first rumor didn't come from Emma. It came from the man who trims my hedge. His name's Benny, retired postal worker, the kind who knows more about a town's secrets than its mayor ever will. That afternoon he leaned on his rake, nodded toward my porch and said, Heard you're selling, Frank. That true? I looked up from the half-sanded board in my hands. Selling what? He chuckled. The house, of course. Word around the bank says papers are in motion. Didn't think you'd ever leave this place. I smiled faintly. Funny thing about words, they move faster than deeds. He nodded, satisfied with the half-answer, and went back to his work, but I could almost hear the echo of his sentence still hanging in the air. Word around the bank. It didn't take much imagination to guess where that word came from. By evening, I knew for certain. Emma called again. This time, she didn't waste breath on pleasantries. Dad, she said, voice tight. I just got a call from Mrs. Mills at the bank. She said a transfer request went through involving your property. She wasn't supposed to tell me, but she did anyway, I finished. I just need to understand, she continued, pushing air through the phone. Why? Why would you do this? Because it was time, I said. Time for what? For you to learn what owning something really means. She exhaled sharply. Dad, please. You're being cryptic again. We can fix whatever this is. It's not broken, I said. It's just finished. Her voice wavered. You're making a mistake. Possibly, I said, but at least it'll be mine. She started crying then. Not the loud kind, but the quiet sobbing of someone who's beginning to understand consequences. I waited it out, letting her find her own breath. When she finally spoke again, her words came softer. Was it because of what I said at dinner? It's because of what you signed at the bank, I said gently. Intentions don't erase ink. There was a pause. Then, Daniel says you're overreacting. I'm sure Daniel says a lot of things when there's money involved. Don't do that, she whispered. Do what? Make him the villain. I don't need to, I said. He built that role himself. She fell silent again, and when she spoke next, her voice sounded younger, almost like the girl who once asked me to build her a treehouse. Dad, if you sell it, where will you go? I looked around my workshop, the sawdust drifting like old snow, the faint scent of varnish rising from the floorboards, Lydia's blueprint hanging on the wall. Wherever the light still comes through the window, I said. That's home enough. She started to say something else, but I ended the call before she could. Not out of cruelty, out of mercy. Sometimes silence is the kindest kind of boundary. The next day I met Caleb again to sign the final authorization. He had already spoken with the Foundation's representative, a quiet woman named Ruth, who ran their heritage restoration projects. She'd seen photos of the property and wanted to preserve it as a symbol of craftsmanship and community spirit. Lydia would have liked her instantly. Everything's clean, Caleb said. Funds will transfer to the Lydia Rowan Foundation account by Friday. I'll keep power of attorney on the trust until you appoint a board. I don't need a board, I said. He smiled. Maybe not now, But someday, when folks ask who Lydia Rowan was, they'll see her name on that plaque, and they'll know she built something twice, once with wood and once with you." I nodded. "That's the plan." He folded his glasses, slid them into his shirt pocket, and said, "You're handling this better than anyone I've ever seen." "Building's just planning with purpose," I said. "Demolition's the same if you're careful." He chuckled. "Remind me never to cross you." That evening the phone rang again, Daniel this time. "Frank," he said, voice low and sharp, "we need to talk." "I think we already did." "No," he said. "You listened. Now you're going to listen again." I smiled at the choice of words. "All right then, Daniel, I'm listening." He hesitated, caught off guard by my calm. "You can't just hand over a property like that. Do you realize what this does to our plans? Emma's devastated." "Plans," I repeated. "That's the problem right there. You made plans around something that wasn't yours. It's family property," he snapped. "No," I said softly. "It's my work, my sweat in those beams, Lydia's laughter in those walls. Family isn't ownership, Daniel. It's stewardship." "Don't lecture me, old man," he said, losing the last of his control. "You're throwing away everything we've built." "You didn't build it?" I said. "You decorated it." There was a long silence. Then, in a tone colder than the snow outside, he said, "You think you've won something here, but all you've done is cut yourself off." "Maybe," I said, "but a clean cut heals faster." I hung up before he could reply. Outside, dusk had fallen, that blue-gray moment where the world looks both new and ancient. I stood on the porch, hands deep in my coat pockets, and watched the light die across the roofline. The air smelled of thawing soil and faraway rain. Marjorie's voice carried from her porch. "You look like a man who just buried a secret." "Something like that," I said. She tilted her head. "You finally told them?" "They told themselves," I said. She nodded knowingly. "Good. Let the echoes do the talking." That night I lit a fire and sat near the window, listening to the wood pop and settle. The crackling reminded me of applause. Soft, approving, final. The papers lay on the table, signed and sealed. The house would soon belong to a foundation bearing Lydia's name, a legacy built not from inheritance, but intention. I wrote one sentence in my notebook before bed. Some houses are sold to strangers, others are given back to love. Then I closed the cover, blew out the lamp, and let the darkness rest easy around me. It was early evening when I saw Emma's car pull into the driveway. The headlights moved slowly, hesitantly, like someone unsure if they were welcome. She parked halfway up, engine idling for a moment before cutting off. Through the windshield, I could see her hands gripping the steering wheel. Still, white-knuckled, as if letting go would make everything real. I didn't go outside. I just waited by the window, the way you wait for weather to decide whether it's going to storm or pass. The porch light flickered once, casting her shadow across the snow. When she finally stepped out, she stood there for a long moment, looking at the house. My house, her childhood home. Lydia's laughter still in its walls. When she knocked, it wasn't loud. 3 careful taps, the kind a person uses when they're not sure they have the right to knock at all. I opened the door. "Hey, Dad," she said softly. "Emma," I replied. "You found the courage." She managed a small smile that didn't hold. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. "Always." The smell of cold air followed her in, metallic, clean, uncertain. She took off her gloves and looked around as if seeing the place for the first time. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. Her eyes went to the mantel where Lydia's photograph still stood beside the wooden clock. "She'd hate what I've done," Emma whispered. "She'd understand," I said. She turned to me, eyes rimmed red. "No, she wouldn't. She was good." I turned into someone I don't even recognize. "You turned into someone afraid," I said. "There's a difference." She shook her head. "I wasn't afraid, Dad. I was greedy. Daniel said it was practical, that you were getting older, that we should start preparing. And I believed him. I thought I was protecting the future, but really I was just trying not to lose control. I finished. I know that feeling. She looked up. Do you? Every time Lydia was sick, I said quietly, I tried to control what couldn't be fixed. It's a dangerous kind of love, the one that tries to manage everything. Her breath caught. I'm sorry. The words hung in the air like fragile glass. I'd been waiting to hear them, but now that they were here, I realized they weren't for me. They were for her own heart. I know, I said. You're not the first person to mistake care for ownership. Tears rolled down her cheeks, slow and soundless. You sold it, didn't you? I gave it back, I said, to the kind of love your mother built it with. She nodded slowly, like she'd already guessed. The foundation? Her name will stay on that land longer than any of ours, I said. You can visit it. You just can't own it. She looked around again, at the stairs, the worn rug, the dent in the wall where she'd thrown a tennis ball too hard when she was 12. It still smells like her. It always will, I said. For a while, we didn't talk. The house filled with the kind of silence that doesn't ask for words, just presence. Then she said, Daniel's furious. I know. He says you humiliated him. He humiliated himself. She gave a weak laugh. You always make it sound so simple. It usually is, I said. We just make it complicated trying to avoid the truth. She sat down on the old sofa, her hands folded in her lap like a penitent student. He's leaving, she said suddenly. Packed his bags this morning. Said I was useless if I couldn't keep my own father in line. I stayed quiet. She looked at me, waiting for advice I wasn't going to give. Finally, she said, I guess I deserve that silence. No, I said. You deserve peace, but you'll have to build it yourself. She nodded, swallowing hard. I don't know where to start. Start by not running from what hurts, I said. Pain's just truth under a bright light. She looked at me for a long time, then whispered, I miss Mom. Good, I said. That means you remember what love looks like. Her eyes filled again. Can I stay a little while? As long as you need, I said. She walked to the window and looked out. The yard was dark, except for the faint glow from Marjorie's kitchen across the fence. She's still baking, Emma said. Some people fight the cold with sugar, I said. Some of us use wood. She turned back to me. Dad, I don't want anything from you. I just want you to know I see it now. What you were trying to teach us. What's that? That love isn't an inheritance. I smiled. Took me 40 years to learn that myself. She came closer, hesitated, then put her arms around me. For the first time in years, she hugged without guilt, without rush, just held on. I felt her shoulders shake, and I realized the house had been waiting for this sound, the sound of remorse finding its breath. After a moment, I said softly, You're forgiven, Emma. She nodded against my shoulder. You always forgive too easily. Not easily, I said, just completely. Later, after she'd gone upstairs to the guest room, I sat by the fire and opened my notebook again. I wrote, When a house forgives the ones who broke it, that's when it becomes a home again. The flames bent low, whispering through the grate, and for the first time since Lydia's passing, the silence inside the walls felt warm, not empty. The morning air carried that scent of early thaw, damp earth, melting frost, and cedar. I parked by the front gate of what was once my house, though it didn't feel like loss anymore. The new sign out front was simple, carved from oak, letters blackened and sealed against the rain. The Lydia Rowan Foundation, preserving craft, preserving kindness. For a moment, I just stood there, one hand resting on the fence post. The wood was cold, smooth, new. It still had that raw grain smell I remembered from the first time I built this fence with Lydia. She'd painted the top rail white while I wasn't looking, humming some tune from a radio that never tuned right. Now her name sat in stone below the porch, on a bronze plaque set into the foundation. I traced the letters with my gloved hand, slow, steady. It wasn't grief I felt. It was completion. Caleb had called earlier that morning to confirm the closing went through. "Funds transferred," he said. "The trust is live. You did it, Frank." I'd thanked him, though thanks didn't quite fit. Builders never thank the hammer. They thank the quiet after the noise. Through the windows, I could see a few volunteers inside already at work, sanding the banister, repainting the kitchen trim, moving furniture Lydia would have approved of. The sound of tools echoed faintly out the open door. It was strange hearing life again in those rooms. Good strange. I stepped onto the porch. A woman in a navy work jacket looked up from the entryway and smiled. "You must be Mr. Rowan." "Guilty," I said. She wiped her hands on a rag and came forward. "Ruth Daniels. We spoke briefly through Caleb. It's an honor." "The honor's mine," I said. "You're giving the house a new heartbeat." She looked around. "It's beautiful. Solid, too. We don't see joinery like this anymore. We're planning to host community workshops here, teach carpentry, restoration, woodworking. You'd be welcome to visit any time." "I might do that," I said. "Can't promise I won't correct your technique." She laughed. "Please do." Her team moved quietly in the background, respectful of the place, as if they understood it wasn't just lumber and paint. It was memory, standing upright. Ruth pointed toward the living room. "We're setting up a small display in here. A dedication wall, some photos, some of Mrs. Rowan's old notes from your blueprints that you shared with Caleb. Would you like to see?" I followed her in. The air smelled faintly of sawdust and lemon oil. On one wall they'd mounted a framed photo of Lydia, smiling, wind in her hair, holding the same thermos from that winter Caleb and I worked together. Beneath it, a brass plate read, "For every home built in love." I couldn't speak for a while. My throat locked the way wood sometimes swells in humidity. Ruth must have noticed, because she said softly, "We'll make sure her story stays here." When I finally found my voice, it came out rough but steady. She'd like that. Outside, wind rattled the shutters, the same ones Lydia insisted on painting herself. I smiled. "They still stick in the rain," I said. "You'll have to sand the edges." Ruth grinned. "Noted, sir." We walked out together, pausing on the porch as sunlight broke through the clouds. It hit the plaque just right, Lydia's name glowing in bronze warmth. "Funny," I said. "When I first built this place, I thought permanence came from concrete and nails. Turns out it's the name you leave behind." She nodded. "And the way people say it." On my drive back home, to my smaller rental near the inlet, the road looked different somehow. The same trees, the same frozen reeds, but softer now, forgiving. At a bend in the road, I slowed down to watch the sunlight reflect off the ice. For a second, I imagined Lydia's reflection beside mine. Not ghostly, just content. When I reached the new house, Marjorie Lane was waiting on the porch with 2 mugs of coffee. "You didn't think I'd miss the unveiling, did you?" she said, handing me one. "You didn't even ask for an invitation," I said. "Didn't need one. I was there when you built it. I earned the right to see you unbuild it." We sat in the cold and watched the inlet water move under a sheet of thin ice. "So," she said after a long sip, "how's it feel to have your wife become a foundation?" I smiled. Lighter, like the house was holding its breath, and now it can finally exhale. She nodded. "Good. Houses shouldn't outlive love. They should carry it." I looked at her, grateful. "You always know what to say." "I always say it late," she replied. "That's what age is. Running behind your own wisdom." We laughed quietly, then fell into companionable silence, the kind that only exists between 2 people who have both built and lost enough to stop measuring time in years. Before heading inside, I took out my notebook and wrote one more line. Names fade on paper, but they last forever, in wood, stone, and kindness. I closed it, feeling no weight this time, just balance. He whined, came off the inlet soft that morning, carrying the smell of wet pine and salt. Spring wasn't here yet, but you could feel it thinking about arriving. Small hints of green under the frost, the faint drip of water off the eaves. For the first time in a long while, the silence around me didn't feel empty. It felt earned. I was up early, habit more than need. Old men keep the hours that builders do. Dawn belongs to those who remember working through it. The kettle hissed on the stove, filling the kitchen with that small, steady sound of life continuing. I poured the water, stirred the coffee, and carried it out to the porch. The boards creaked beneath me, familiar, forgiving. Across the yard, Marjorie's curtains were already open. She waved when she saw me, mug in hand, and shouted through the morning chill, "You still breathing, Frank Rowan?" "Barely," I called back. "That's how I know I'm alive." She laughed, and I heard her door shut. That was the rhythm of our mornings now. Two old souls greeting the day like neighbors who'd survived the same storm. I sat down in the rocker Lydia picked out 30 years ago. Its paint had peeled down to gray, but it still held. Everything she touched tended to do that. From where I sat, I could see the inlet water turning silver in the light. The reflection of the old house shimmered faintly across the surface. You'd never know it was no longer mine. And somehow, that was the point. Last week, the local paper ran a small article about the foundation. "Historic home restored for community use," it said. There was a picture. The volunteers smiling, Lydia's plaque gleaming under the headline. No mention of me, which was perfect. Builders shouldn't sign their names on roofs meant for everyone. Emma had come by yesterday. She looked healthier, quieter, a woman learning to breathe without someone else's permission. She'd brought a box of old photographs and a pie she'd baked herself. "Mom's recipe," she said, smiling shyly. "We ate it at the table, and it tasted exactly like the summers we used to steal from time. Sweet, messy, and gone too soon." When she left, she kissed my cheek and said, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I didn't answer then, but I whispered it later to the empty kitchen. That's what fathers are for. The phone rang mid-morning. Caleb. He still called every few days, pretending it was business. "Ruth says the first workshop's full," he told me. "They're calling it the Lydia Rowan Program for Preservation. They're inviting local teens to learn woodworking from retired craftsmen. Maybe you'd consider being one of them." "Retired?" I said. "That's a word people use when they've run out of nails." He laughed. "So should I tell them yes?" "Tell them I'll think about it," I said. Can't rush perfection. After we hung up, I just sat there a while, watching the sky slowly open its color. The kind of blue that looks almost new every day. A blue Lydia would have liked. A blue that didn't demand anything, just showed up. I reached for my notebook, the one that had followed me through all these months. Most pages were filled now. Plans, thoughts, the confessions of a man rebuilding himself from the inside out. On the last blank page, I wrote one sentence. "Some noise leaves a scar, some leaves music." Then I closed the book and set it beside the coffee cup. From the workshop, I could hear the faint creak of the vise on the bench, the wood expanding in the warmth, still alive. I stood, walked inside, and ran my fingers across the table where Lydia's last blueprint still lay. The pencil marks had faded, but her handwriting was clear. "Don't forget the light," I smiled. "Didn't forget," I said aloud. The room smelled of sawdust and forgiveness, a combination that feels like morning itself. I opened the window. The wind carried in the sound of kids laughing somewhere down the road, probably walking toward the newly opened foundation. It was the kind of sound that makes a man understand why he built anything in the first place. I let the breeze move through the house, lifting the curtains just enough to make them look alive again. Then I whispered into the space, "Rest easy, Lydia. The house is still teaching." The echo came back soft, rounded by the years, the kind of echo that only answers when it's at peace. The sun broke late that morning, slow and reluctant. I was already in the workshop by then, oiling the hinges on the door that had started to stick again. Lydia used to say, Every door tells you when it needs attention, same as people. I suppose I'd been ignoring both for too long. The wood took the oil easily, darkening as it soaked in. The smell rose warm, linseed, pine, and thyme. I worked it into the grain with slow circles, the way you'd soothe a restless animal. Outside, the wind pressed against the walls, reminding me that spring was still fighting its way through winter. On the workbench sat a stack of unfinished pieces. Small frames, a chair leg, a box I'd started years ago. I used to think leaving things unfinished was failure. Now I saw it differently. Some things aren't meant to end. They're meant to remind you there's still life to build. I heard a knock behind me, not the tentative kind from months ago, but a confident, steady rhythm. Emma stood at the doorway, a wool coat over her shoulders, her hair tied back the way Lydia used to wear it when she worked in the garden. "Morning," she said. "You fixing the door again?" "Just reminding it who's in charge," I said. She smiled. I thought I'd help. I handed her a cloth, and together we polished the frame until the light caught the edges. She was good at it. Careful, patient. The kind of patience you only learn after breaking something you wish you hadn't. When we were done, she ran her fingers along the wood and said, "Feels alive." "It is," I said. "Everything that's cared for stays alive a little longer." She turned to me, her expression soft. "I visited the foundation yesterday." "Oh?" "They're starting the first youth workshop next week. I signed up to volunteer." I looked at her, surprised but not. "Teaching woodworking?" "Learning first," she said, "then teaching. Thought I should finally understand what you and Mom loved so much." I felt something inside me shift. Not pride exactly, but that quiet ache that comes when something lost begins to return in a new form. "She'd be proud," I said. Emma smiled. "I hope so." We stood there for a while, the sound of the wind slipping through the cracks like a voice that didn't want to interrupt. Then she said, "Do you ever miss it?" "What's that?" "The noise, the people, the chaos of it all." I laughed softly. "Every day, but peace is its own kind of music." She nodded, looking around the workshop. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why did you keep this place? You could have sold it too." I wiped my hands on a rag. "Because every builder needs one door that only opens for them." She understood. You could see it in her eyes. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. She stayed for coffee. We talked about small things. The weather, the pie Marjorie dropped off, a movie she wanted me to watch. When she left, she kissed my cheek again, and this time there was no apology in it. Just love, unspoken, uncomplicated. After she drove off, I went back to the door. It swung smoothly now, without hesitation. I stood there, one hand on the frame, listening to the faint echo of her laughter fading down the road. For the first time in years, I left the workshop door open. The wind moved through, carrying the scent of spring and sawdust. Outside, a bird landed on the fence, a blue jay bright and bold. It hopped once, chirped, then flew toward the old house across the inlet, the one with Lydia's name on it. I watched it go until it disappeared into the light. Then I whispered to the empty air, "Job's done, Lydia. Doors open." And for a moment I could swear the wind answered. Soft, certain, and smiling. Some mornings I wake up before the sun, and for a few seconds I forget that time has moved on. The air still smells faintly of sawdust and coffee, and somewhere in the quiet I can almost hear Lydia humming, the same low tune she used when she painted the porch. Then the light hits the window, and I remember, the house across the inlet isn't mine anymore, but it still belongs to us, to what we built, to what we learned, to what we finally forgave. From my porch I can see the foundation on clear days. Kids run across the yard, their laughter carrying across the water like music that doesn't need words. They chase each other between the oaks I planted 40 years ago. Those trees are taller now, their branches reaching into the same sky Lydia used to watch from the bedroom window. Sometimes I see Ruth outside, showing a young student how to hold a chisel, or Caleb dropping by with paperwork he pretends I still need to sign. They wave. I wave back. None of us say much. We don't have to. The work speaks louder than anything we could add to it. Emma visits most Sundays. She brings groceries, sometimes cookies she bakes herself, and a quiet that doesn't feel guilty anymore. She's learning the kind of silence that comes from peace, not avoidance. Last week she showed me a wooden jewelry box she made at one of the workshops. The corners weren't perfect, the varnish a little uneven, but it was beautiful, not because of what it was, but because of what it meant. "You'd be proud, Dad," she said. "I already am," I told her. She smiled, the kind of smile Lydia used to wear when she finally got something right after a dozen wrong tries. Then she said, "I think I finally understand what you meant about foundations." "What's that?" "They're not made of concrete," she said. "They're made of forgiveness." That stayed with me long after she left. Now, when the days stretch long and the light stays soft, I take my notebook out to the porch and write things I may never read again. Thoughts about wood, time, and people, the three materials no one ever truly masters. The other night, I wrote, "Every house we build teaches us how to stand when life tilts." I think Lydia would like that one. Marjorie still stops by with pie. She pretends it's out of kindness, but I know she just wants to make sure I haven't turned to dust yet. She says the neighborhood feels different without the tension that used to hang over it. I tell her tension is just the sound of nails settling, and sometimes that's all peace really is. Every now and then, when the sun dips low, I drive to the foundation. The volunteers leave by dusk, and the place grows quiet again. I walk through the rooms, the ones Lydia and I built by hand, and I swear the wood still remembers us. In the kitchen, there's a new table now, wider, smoother, made for teaching. I run my hand across it and whisper, "Good work." Not because I made it, but because someone else did. That's the beauty of legacy. It stops being about you long before it ends. Before leaving, I always pause by the plaque. I touch Lydia's name and say, "We did it." And I mean it every time. Back home, the inlet mirrors the sky perfectly. No ripples, no wind. It's the kind of stillness you can only earn by living long enough to understand that noise doesn't make meaning. Living does. I close the workshop door at night and listen to the world breathing. Somewhere out there, another man is building, another daughter is learning, another family is finding their way back to each other. And that's enough. The house still stands. The name still shines. The love still works. Quietly, patiently, like wood remembering the hands that shaped it. I pour one last cup of coffee, sit in the rocker Lydia chose, and let the silence fill every corner like light.